I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and yet something in the air felt heavy, almost too heavy to breathe. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, no fanfare, no warning, just a slip of paper that would change everything. I held it in my hands, my fingers trembling. My eyes scanned the words, hardly believing what I was reading. You are the sole heir to your late uncle's fortune. My heart pounded. A fortune! All these years my life had been ordinary, quiet, predictable, safe. But now, in an instant, everything shifted. I couldn't help but smile. Dreams I had buried deep inside, ambitions I had never dared to speak aloud, suddenly felt possible. I imagined a life of freedom, a life where I wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. A life where I could finally breathe without restraint. That evening, I shared the news with my husband. At first, I expected him to share my excitement. I expected him to smile and dream with me. But the moment I mentioned the inheritance, I noticed a change. His eyes glinted with something I hadn't seen before. Something cold, calculating, almost predatory. "Really?" he said, a forced smile plastered across his face. "That's great," I laughed nervously. "Don't you feel excited? This could change everything for us," he shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." But the words felt hollow, empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. A week passed. I started making small plans, paying off debts, helping friends, thinking about the future. But every conversation with him became tense, awkward. And then one evening it happened. I returned home after a long day at work, my heart light with the anticipation of sharing some of my plans with him. But the house felt colder than usual, silent in a way that made my stomach twist. And there he was, sitting in the living room, a glass of expensive wine in hand, eyes devoid of warmth. "I don't need you anymore," he said suddenly, his voice eerily calm. "I'm rich now. I can have whatever I want. Whoever I want, you're just in the way." For a moment I didn't understand. The words felt like a punch to my chest, knocking the air from my lungs. What are you saying?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. He stood, his gaze unwavering. "Pack your things, leave. I don't need you in my life anymore." I felt my world collapse. Every memory we had shared, every promise whispered in the quiet of the night, every dream we had built together, it all shattered in an instant. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stare at the man I thought I knew, now revealed as a stranger. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed, suitcase by my side, heart heavy with disbelief. How could someone I loved, someone I trusted, turn their back on me the moment money entered the picture? The pain was unbearable, but amidst the heartbreak, a tiny spark of clarity flickered. I realized something crucial. The inheritance had not only changed our lives, it had exposed the truth. My husband was never who I thought he was, and now I had a choice. I could sink into despair, let this betrayal define me, or I could rise, stronger than ever, and reclaim my life on my own terms. That night I didn't sleep, I didn't cry. I made a silent vow to myself, I will not let this break me. I will not let this define me. I will find my strength, and I will flourish, even if he never sees me rise. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be loneliness, challenges, and moments when the pain threatened to overwhelm me. But I also knew something else. Within that pain lay power. Within that betrayal lay opportunity, and I was ready to step into it. The next morning, the world felt sharper, colder. I walked the streets aimlessly, suitcase in hand, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. Every passerby seemed oblivious to the storm raging inside me. But I didn't want pity. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted answers, answers that I feared I might never get. I kept replaying his words in my mind. "I don't need you anymore. I'm rich now." The sting of betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I had believed in him, trusted him, loved him with every fiber of my being. And he discarded me as though I were a shadow, invisible, irrelevant. But as I wandered, a strange thing happened. Anger began to simmer beneath the shock. It wasn't the wild, uncontrollable anger of the moment. It was a quiet, steady flame, a determination I hadn't known I possessed. I realized then that his betrayal, though painful, was also a revelation. He had shown me who he truly was. And the truth, no matter how bitter, was a gift. Returning to the house later to gather a few essentials, I noticed how different everything felt. The home that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a prison. Every photograph, every memento, every little token of shared memories seemed tainted, reminders of what I had lost, not to death, not to fate, but to the coldness of a man who had once claimed to love me. I confronted him one last time, hoping, foolishly perhaps, that he would show remorse. "Please," I said, voice trembling but firm, "if there's even a part of you that cares about me, tell me why. Tell me why this is happening." He looked at me with something I had never seen before. Pure indifference. "You've always been comfortable, dependent," he said, "but now I'm free. I don't need anyone slowing me down. I don't need you." I swallowed hard, fighting tears. So all those years, all the promises, they meant nothing? "They meant whatever I wanted them to mean," he said coldly, turning away. The door closed behind me, and I realized that closure would never come from him. I would not wait for him to apologize, to explain, to make amends. The world he left me with was harsh, yes, but it was also mine. Mine to navigate, mine to conquer. Days turned into weeks. Friends who once surrounded me began to drift away, uncomfortable with my pain, unsure how to console someone who had been cast aside. The loneliness was suffocating. There were nights when I lay awake, questioning myself, wondering if I had failed, if I had been too naive, too trusting, too weak. And yet, in those quiet, sleepless nights, another voice emerged. A voice I had long ignored. "You are stronger than you realize. You have survived storms before, you will survive this." I began small, simple steps toward reclaiming my life. I found a modest apartment, stripped down to the essentials, and started working tirelessly, not for anyone else, not for revenge, but for myself. Every challenge became a lesson. Every moment of pain became fuel for growth. I learned to stand on my own, to trust my instincts, to face the world without leaning on someone else's validation. It wasn't easy. There were days when despair knocked on my door like an unwelcome guest, whispering that I was alone, that I had lost everything. But each time, I remembered the fire that had first ignited in me, the anger, the betrayal, the truth. By the end of that month, I was no longer the same woman who had been kicked out of her home. I was stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. I had discovered a truth that would guide me for the rest of my life. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And then step into your power. Betrayal had hurt me deeply, yes, but it had also awakened me. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. My journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Life, I soon realized, does not wait for you to recover. It doesn't pause while you nurse your wounds. The world keeps moving, and if you don't move with it, you fall behind. The first few months after leaving him were the hardest. Every morning felt like climbing a mountain that refused to end. Bills piled up. Responsibilities weighed on me. I had no safety net, no familiar hand to hold, no voice telling me I was enough. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep, exhausted from fighting a world that seemed determined to break me. But with each struggle, a quiet transformation began. I started noticing the small victories. The first time I paid a bill on my own without fear. The first time I cooked a meal in my tiny apartment and felt pride in my accomplishment. Slowly, I began to understand something profound. Survival was more than endurance. It was empowerment. It was the realization that I could build a life of my own making without depending on anyone else. I also discovered the importance of self-worth. I remembered all the moments I had doubted myself in my marriage, all the times I had silenced my dreams to accommodate someone else. And I promised myself I would never do that again. The woman he had discarded was not weak. She had been hidden under layers of compromise and self-doubt. Now, she would rise. To rebuild, I had to redefine myself. I took courses online, read books I had long neglected, and explored skills I never thought I could master. Every lesson, every small success, was a brick in the foundation of the new life I was building. Slowly, I began to see a version of myself that was independent, capable, and resilient. But transformation was not just about skills or knowledge. It was also about mindset. I had to confront my pain head-on. I had to accept that he had betrayed me, that life had been unfair, and that anger, while powerful, could not guide me forever. I had to channel that emotion into purpose, into action, into something that would shape my destiny. During those lonely nights, I often looked at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were no longer filled with fear or doubt. They were sharp, alive, full of resolve. She had been broken, yes, but brokenness had made her see clearly. She had been abandoned, yes, but abandonment had given her freedom. And freedom, I realized, was the most powerful weapon of all. Then came the turning point. A small opportunity, a freelance project, a consulting job, gave me my first taste of independence. It was modest, nothing like the inheritance that had ignited this chain of events, but it was mine. Every payment I earned, every recognition I received, reinforced a truth that was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. I did not need anyone to define my worth. I did not need him. I did not need his approval, his money, or his presence. And yet the past lingered. Memories of betrayal were like shadows in the corners of my mind, whispering doubts, reminding me of what I had lost. But each day, as I faced the world alone, I grew stronger. I realized that the story I had once thought was over, my story, was far from finished. In fact, it was entering the most important chapter of all, the chapter I would write with my own hands. By the end of that year, I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving in small, meaningful ways. I had a job I loved, friends who supported me, and a newfound sense of self-respect. I had discovered something far more valuable than inheritance or wealth, my own strength, my own voice, and the ability to rise from the ashes of betrayal. I had been pushed to the edge, abandoned when I needed support, and left with nothing but pain. Yet it was precisely in that emptiness that I found clarity. I realized that life's cruelties, its betrayals, its sudden storms were not meant to break us. They were meant to awaken us. And awakened I was, ready to face the world as the architect of my own destiny. The woman I once was, the one who depended on someone else's approval, the one who thought love meant sacrifice at the cost of herself, was gone. In her place stood someone unrecognizable even to herself, strong, unyielding, and fiercely determined. By now, I had begun building a life that was completely my own. I started my own small business, something I had dreamed about for years but never dared pursue. At first, it was humble, a few clients, a small office, long hours filled with uncertainty. But every challenge I faced, every obstacle I overcame, strengthened me. I learned to trust my instincts, to make decisions without fear, to celebrate not just success, but the courage to try. I also discovered the importance of surrounding myself with people who uplifted me. I found mentors who guided me, friends who believed in me, and communities that celebrated my achievements. For the first time in my life, I realized that true wealth wasn't measured by money alone. It was measured by freedom, by choice, by the people who inspired you to rise. And then came the moments of quiet triumph. The first time a client praised my work, the first time I signed a contract that reflected my value, the first time I looked at my bank account and realized I've earned this on my own. No one had handed it to me. No one had paved this road. Every step had been mine. Every victory earned through perseverance, resilience, and self-belief. I thought of him sometimes, the man who had once thrown me aside. I realized that his betrayal, as painful as it had become the catalyst for everything I had built. Without that heartbreak, I might have remained complacent, dependent, and unfulfilled. But because he had chosen wealth over love, because he had discarded me like an object, I had discovered my true power. And power, I discovered, is not just about money or status. It is about control over your own life. It is about refusing to let someone else define your worth. It is about rising above betrayal, refusing to be a victim, and choosing to thrive regardless of circumstance. By the end of this chapter, I had fully transformed. I was no longer a woman defined by the past, by the mistakes of others, or by the betrayal I had endured. I was a woman defined by strength, resilience, and vision. I had reclaimed my life in every sense. But transformation is not only personal, it is also about influence. I began mentoring others who had suffered betrayal, abuse, or abandonment. I shared my story openly, not for sympathy, but as proof that pain can become power. I became a living testament to the fact that even when someone tries to break you, you can rise higher than you ever imagined. I no longer feared loneliness, loss, or failure. I had learned that each of these was temporary and that the greatest strength comes from within. Every morning, as I looked in the mirror, I saw not a victim, not a discarded woman, but a warrior, someone who had faced the storm and emerged victorious. And in that victory I found peace, not the shallow peace that comes from avoiding struggle, but the profound peace that comes from knowing you fought, you endured, and you rose. I had turned betrayal into fuel, heartbreak into vision, and despair into opportunity. This was my story now, a story of transformation, a story of empowerment, a story of triumph. And it was far from over. Years had passed since that fateful day when he had thrown me out, declaring that he no longer needed me. The pain of betrayal had long faded, replaced by something far more powerful, freedom, clarity, and a life I had built entirely on my own terms. By now, my small business had grown into something extraordinary, a thriving enterprise built on hard work, vision, and unwavering determination. People respected me, clients trusted me, and my story inspired countless others who had faced betrayal, loss, or abandonment. I had become proof that the darkest moments can ignite the brightest transformations. And then one day, he walked back into my life, not to apologize, not to reconcile, but with a hint of curiosity, perhaps even regret. I looked at him, not with anger, not with longing, but with a calm, unshakable confidence. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had believed powerless, was no longer the same. He looked at me, eyes searching for the familiar vulnerability he once exploited. But all he found was strength. You've changed, he said, almost whispering, as though afraid my new life might reject him. I smiled, not out of malice, but with quiet pride. Yes, I have. And everything I am, everything I've built, I built without you. You taught me something, though. How to see clearly, how to fight, and how to never let someone else define my worth. He had nothing to say after that. Words failed him because the truth could not be spoken. He had lost the opportunity, not just to control me, but to witness the full power of the woman he had once abandoned. That moment, more than any paycheck or achievement, solidified my triumph. I had not only survived betrayal, I had turned it into power. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my destiny. I had proven that being cast aside was not the end, but the beginning. In the years that followed, I continued to grow, not just financially, but spiritually, emotionally, and morally. I mentored women who had been abandoned, guided those who had lost their confidence, and inspired anyone who had been told they were not enough. My story became a testament. No one has the power to diminish you unless you allow them. And the greatest lesson I learned: true success is not measured by revenge, wealth, or recognition. True success is measured by the strength to rise after betrayal, the courage to rebuild when the world has turned against you, and the grace to transform pain into purpose. Now, when I reflect on that day, the day he kicked me out, claiming he no longer needed me, I no longer feel sadness, fear, or anger. I feel gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the lessons, and for the strength that adversity revealed. I am the author of my own story. I am the master of my own destiny. I am unbreakable, and this is my triumph.